Those are some pretty cool previews. Hi, you guys, and welcome to this evening's Glancing Behind the Veil. I am unsure, but I think my guest is still trying to log into the green room. Once in a while, there's a little bit of trouble connecting with some of the electronic devices. I hope that all of you guys, oh, okay, it says that he's backstage now. Cool beans. Um, I hope that you all really like this evening's podcast. I'm extremely excited about this podcast. I'm sure many of you growing up, especially in the those of us that grew up in like the Walt Disney era, have heard of. Well, look, I've just got crazy stuff going on tonight over here. Have heard of the King Arthur mythology as we grew up, and maybe seen like the the Walt Disney. Um, okay, well, hold on. My producer is telling me that there is no video feed. Okay. Need a video permission. Sorry, I'm trying to do a few things at a time, and I'm not the most tech savvy in the world. Um, but many of us, we grew up and we saw like some of the cartoons like a Disney. Hey, Bonzam, I hope everything's doing better down there in New Zealand for you guys. I've been trying to keep an eye out. It looks like there's a lot of media silence on your situation. No surprise. um, the King Arthur story that we grew up with, I mean, you know, like the Sword of the Stone, like the animated Sword of the Stone. And of course, we've all heard of like Merlin the wizard, or he was a bard actually, but some people refer to him as a wizard, but he was a bard, which was a druid, one of the levels of druidry or triadry. Um, and we've heard of like a lot of the Camelot folklore and Lancelot and Guinevere, and about the wonderful love stories of Camelot. We've watched a lot of the cute Hollywood stories like A Knight's Tale, which I think is one of the cutest ones that is out there. And there's been tons and tons and tons of renditions. I mean, there's been like Broadway musicals of Camelot for decades. As a matter of fact, what began my love affair and quest for knowledge, and it seemed like a continuous link to my life about Camelot and King Arthur. My father's sister, my Aunt Lois, had taken me when I was 16 years old down to the Cincinnati Music Hall for the Broadway production of Camelot. And it had can I think, Richard Chamberlain, and my brain is like glitching because I'm trying to do tech at the same time. But they were in the Hollywood production of it, and it was just such a funny, hilarious, but also beautiful show to watch. And usually, it was a serious theater, but it was kind of funny when the King Arthur character had turned around backwards. He accidentally stabbed Lancelot with his sword and kind of like pulled it out, and they kind of like made like a little joke about it being like a dipstick and uh, short on being short on fluids. And after that, I don't know. I just kind of I got enamored with the entire story of King Arthur. Um, I wasn't aware at the time that Middletown High School, my Aunt Lois, Middletown High School, prior to that, I think it was 1964. I have to go back and look. Camelot was even the theme of their prom. So I thought that was kind of neat, and that was actually ended up being the reason why she went to the Broadway production, which took me to the Broadway production. And it just seems like ever since that point, I think there's been one thing after another that has just slowly kept pulling the mythology and the lore about Camelot back into my life, which I think is kind of interesting. And I don't believe in coincidences. I do think that the universe does things the way that it does intentionally. That being said, tonight I'm going to discuss the story about King Arthur and the possibility that there is a true and factual King Arthur in history. King Arthur. Well, I guess what should I start with first? if we get there, there's many. Okay, what I'll overview. There are many different variations in the mythology and the lore of our Arthur, King Arthur. And in this particular um, conversation that we're going to have this evening, it is it's going towards the. I'm trying to send back and forth messages at the same time. Sorry, I apologize for this. um, in this particular discussion that we're going to have this evening on King Arthur, it's about his relationship and connections with the United States of America, or America, which very few are aware existed. For some reason, and I think that will end up being revealed. Many of us aren't aware, but many are aware, however, that there's been an intentional cover-up of this story and of this lineage, this royalty, and this family line, and it all circles back around to Wales. Now, most of us, of course, have heard of like Diana, Princess of Wales. Most of us were truly in love and enamored by her. And this is that country that we're referring to. It's Wales, it's Welsh. At one point in time, just like Scotland and other different countries, Wales was, hey, Shaman, hey, Brandon, how are you doing? At one point in time, unfortunately, Wales was swallowed into the whole of, underneath the English monarchy. And eventually all of that kind of like became dubbed like Britain, but truly Britannia and those areas were actually a cultic area and had their own identities at that time, separate of like the Anglo-Saxons. But it just seems that there's been a constant intentional um, agenda, is what I would call it, to basically erase the history of the nation of Wales and the individuals of Wales. As a matter of fact, one of our owners of our network lives in Wales, and there's even such a push to remove the history of Wales that even the teachers within their school system, very few of them even know the Welsh history, and they do not have history books of Wales inside of their own classrooms. I don't know if this is one of those situations where it's removed the history of a country so that all people have the same narrative, or what it is. But prior to, he's trying to call. Okay. Thank you. My producer's working on getting this techno glitch messed up. But prior to the 1900s, this was basically a common conversation that we had, even in the United States of America. We knew that we had Welsh colonies that had came and helped to begin the colonization of North America. It was in our books. It was in our periodicals. It was just common knowledge. And then after the 1900s, this information just dissipated, it dried up, and it was removed as a conversation. And really, basically, from that point on, nothing about any other nations coming pre-Columbian, pre-Christopher Columbus was even discussed. And you're absolutely, you are right, Bonzam. They are taking down all history globally across the nation. I mean, across the globe, globally across the nation, across the globe. And I think that might be part of what this agenda is, to remove Wales. Thank God for the Scottish people. I mean, they still hold so tight to their prior histories and their knowledges, and they've still even kept with their oral traditions too, as well as the other things. And fortunately, Wales did that also. What got me on the track of the learning, about Wales and this information was when I began studying my genealogy. Through my great grandmother, my grandma Walters, but she was originally born Back, which was Bach, and through her, I started tracking back her family line. Actually, I have another cousin, Jack Arrowood. He's done extensive genealogical studies with our family too. And we've been just blessed that our family always kept documentation and always kept for some reasons, even with covered wagons, they happen to have like cameras and stuff, and we've been able to successfully document our family history and family, um, trails. And then on top of it, beginning of the month, yes, they did. Yes, they did. The day of the book burnings. You're right. They did. Once they started doing, yeah, it was a new day when they started doing the book burnings. You're right, Bonzam. I fully agree on that one. Um, and when I began like studying our family history and stuff, it took me to a grandmother, and her name was Catherine Robertson. And somebody had intentionally changed and removed the existing. It's a Nocturne, Kentucky, is the area. Somebody removed the old original headstones and replaced it with one that was created, I think it was in 1962. I knew this date, and this is silly of me to not remember this, but they got rid of the other ones and pushed them over the hill. And we had not one, but we had two sarcophagus, one for her and one for him. And we now have one sarcophagus. Supposedly, she's buried underneath of him. Whether that's true, I don't know. I can't understand the concept of, digging up the one hole and burying it and putting one there. Um, that great grandmother had like reddish hair, green eyes. She was from Scotland. And when you follow out that family line, um, who she is and what her relation is through the Clan Robertson. If you follow out Clan Robertson, that takes you over with my family line. A lot of it is the kings and queens of Scotland. And the kings and queens of Scotland, of course, like all hierarchy and royal houses at that time, they would intermarry. That way they strengthened who they are. They strengthened their connections with royalty and with, within the other nations that were around them. I mean, it just made them stronger, and it also gained peace. When I followed those family lines out, it brought me to one of my great umpteen times, I'd have to count it at this point, grandfather's Llewellyn the Great. Llewellyn the Great was the king of, king of Gwynedd, or Gwynedd, as some people call it, and that is an area in North Wales. And he eventually was like, the Prince of Wales. Through like a lot of wars and diplomacy and stuff like that, he pretty much dominated the nation of Wales for a period of about 45 years. When we go to to what we're going to discuss this evening, which is Prince Madoc. Prince Madoc is a grandson also of the same grandfather that I have, which was, Llewellyn the Great is what his name was. Prince Madoc, my dog, I think I might have a tenant knocking at my door, but they're not going to get me to answer it right now. This is one of those nights. You know what? It is the full moon. Actually, it's like past it now. Prince Madoc, he's also known as Madoc Owain Gwynedd because Owain Gwynedd was his father. He was a Welsh prince, and he is said to have sailed to the United States of America. Well, actually, it was North America at that time. In 1170. Now, that date happens to be disputed, but he came here to this continent, and he actually stepped foot on this continent prior to Christopher Columbus, who is supposed to have come here in 1492. Many know, but many don't know, that it has been proven that we were taught false narratives growing up. Christopher Columbus never stepped foot in North America. Christopher Columbus, he was in Hispaniola, which is like the Cuban area, the Bahamas area and stuff, and he did end up going to South America, and I think to the Central American regions, but he was never in North America. The Welsh, however, did come and were in North America. According to the story, Prince Madoc, at the time of his father's death, which would have been in 1169 BC, but that date is debated. It may have been sooner, but anyway, with Prince Madoc, at the time of his father's death, there were, as you would expect, there was a lot of family that was fighting to be, the next king, the next hierarchy, and who gets this and who gets that. In the nation of Wales, they have a different type of way of determining the hierarchy than other monarchies. In Wales, even illegitimate family or children that are born out of wedlock to, say, a mistress, are also considered to be legitimate, therefore legitimate heirs, so long as the king does acknowledge them. And, King Owen, he did acknowledge um, Prince Madoc and his brothers and siblings. So, they were in line and were possible if they wanted to vie for inheritance of the Kingdom of Wales or the Throne of Wales. Um, Prince Madoc, however, was a very peaceful person, and he wasn't interested in fighting with his siblings and everybody else. And during that time period, Wales had also came underneath the domination of King Edward. It was under King Edward the First when my great-grandfather Llewellyn the Great, multiple great-grandfather Llewellyn the Great, ruled the Welsh area. But it was King Edward the Second when Prince Madoc's father, Owen Gwynedd, had taken the throne. What he decided to do instead of fighting was to flee to America. And, well, of course, the word America wasn't used, but it was to flee to America. There is a medieval tradition, and it's a story that evolved, and it was about a Welsh, hero, which was Prince Madoc and his sea voyage, and his, time period of what I would call the beginning of the colonialization of the United States of America, which was 300 years before Columbus's coming to America. When you start studying about this, Madoc's father during the 12th century, as I said, was a real king, and he was widely considered to be one of the greatest, and that's why he's called the Great. He was considered to be one of the greatest rulers that the Kingdom of Wales had ever had, and of the Middle Ages altogether, across other nations and stuff. He had a lot of battles and different stuff with other princes and with King Edward. No, I keep saying Edward. King Henry II of England, and there was a bloody dispute and stuff that really, and literally bloody, war battles and stuff at his death of, who would become an heir and who would get that. And his heir, Hywel, he was called the Poet Prince, and Owain's younger sons, Melgen and Rodri, read by David, two of the children of the Princess Dowager, Christian Gronwy, and one of the children of Gladys Ferk Lyric. And some of those names I probably definitely said wrong. But Lyric, they were fighting for who got to have, the title of the lands. Let me see what Bonzam, it just popped up. Yours just now started popping up. That's too funny. Yes, Google has changed many, many meanings on different words to change the agendas and to make it more difficult when you try to search out these histories. They've made it extremely difficult. And when I search out a lot of these in my genealogy and stuff at times, what I will have happen is it will even say mythological, and it'll say mythology. In even the oh, cool, we have Rick aboard. It will even say mythology on a lot of my genealogical searches, and that's because it's oral tradition. But as I've said in other podcasts, oral tradition is considered to be valid in certain cultures. We accept the oral tradition of the Hebraic peoples. We accept the oral tradition of other different types of cultures. Why are we not willing to accept the oral traditions of, say, Wales or Scotland? Why are they the less validated? Just because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're wanting to say. The guest that I have this evening, his name is Rick Osman, and he has been able to link in, and he won the battle. He got into the link. He wrote a book, and it's The Graves of the Golden Bear. And he who that is, if you don't know who that is, that is a reference to King Arthur. And I'm going to since we've been waiting for him for a minute, I'm going to go ahead and let Rick go ahead, or I'm going to let the producer bring Rick on in. We're going to kind of fast track and bring him in. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. See, we just had we just had a little bit of those little genies in there messing with the technical end of it for a minute.
I used to do a show
um,
with a friend of mine called the Hollow Earth Insider, and or Unraveling the Secrets, and it was about his website, the Hollow Earth Insider. But we had invasions by Duros, those critters from the inside of the Earth.
oh my gosh, that is so funny that you had that. I had a gentleman. He's actually in Deadwood, South Dakota, and he's a miner. And there's an area there's the old Homestead mine. And what they've done is Sanford University has put a facility in there, and they're studying antimatter or dark matter. And he works as a miner, and they're mining out another full section of that area. They're getting ready to shoot a signal from Chicago all the way to South Dakota so that they can measure the neutrinos, is what I think that they're saying, the neutrinos and the photons. And they're working on what I'm trying to think what the name they even call them. The neutrinos are working on the black holes. I knew that name. I should have known that. Sagittarius, that's a SGA star, is a black hole, and that's my horoscope. So I should have known that. But yeah, they're working on that. And he said while they've been down there in the mines, they've been running into a lot of what the Cornish or the Welsh call Tommy knockers.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and so he came on and he talked about some of the little creatures that they have, down in the earth.
Well, I
So
talked
I
about
gave
a little bit about that in the book too. The little what would you call them? The tricksters. That's the only name you can give them.
Yeah, that's the other name that they call them.
Yeah, and the Native Americans called them Pukwudgies or Pukwudgies. What I found most interesting about that part is the last two syllables, which is genies.
Yeah. You know
So
what? That is so funny. When you start following out a lot of the etymology of words, and you start, and I speak 5 languages, although I need to brush up on a lot of them. My dad always says, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I'm going to tell you what, that happens all the time. And he is right about that, about a lot of things. But when you start searching and researching words, and that's like another one of the ways that people are able to I guess, verify the path lines of migrations is by following, the archaeology of the language, how it's
yeah,
came through. So that's interesting. That you just gave me a new rabbit hole.
this field is so full of holes that you never get a rest.
I was going to say, like I needed another rabbit hole. What I was telling our viewers right before you came is I was giving them kind of a historical about, Wales, and basically how Wales has been a subject, in the history of Wales has been a subject that's kind of been dissipated. They've kind of gotten away from it. And I explained to them that even the history teachers in Wales themselves do not have history books on Wales. And I told them that the way I had initially gotten into this conversation and studying it was many, 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 many years ago. My father's sister had taken me to a Broadway production down in Cincinnati Music Hall of Camelot. And that kind of stemmed my interest. And then I explained to them I didn't know that that was her prom theme. So that's why she took me. But then when I started studying our genealogy, that Llewellyn the Great is my ancestral grandfather. And so Prince Madoc and I have the same ancestral grandfather. So I've just been kind of following that rabbit hole for a while. And I'm friends with Monica Escobar in Germany, and she's the one that wrote the German version of Wilson and Blackett's book with the search on Artorius Rex or King Arthur. And I started showing her, sending her, through the messenger, this genealogy and this I was finding out and this and that. And she told me, she says, I know somebody that you might want to talk to. And she told me to get a hold of you. And she said, I'm telling you now, she said, he's the authoritarian. She said, probably in the world about what's going on in the United States with Prince Madoc. She said, but at least in your area, for sure, he is in the United States.
Well, I wouldn't go with world, but and I may not be the best informed in the United States for that matter. However, I'm in touch with them. So we'll go with that part.
I believe in that. Always,
And yes,
always lean into people that know more than you do.
yeah, and it seems to be most. But I did a lot of recent catching up on this topic, just days before you contacted me, in fact. And I had very recently visited two of the more important sites associated with the Prince Madoc story. So one of those sites is called 14 Mile Creek or Rose Island or Devil's Backbone. It has many names and it's been investigated by many people and has been disparaged by a couple of them.
And that's about
However,
2 hours, a little over 2 hours
yes,
from where I live.
yeah, you know precisely
No.
where it is, I'm sure. I actually have, I don't know if they'll show up on the camera or not, but I actually have some images here of what it looked
You
like.
know what? Can you pull that up, Dave? What he just showed you? I did send you an overlay of that. It's a
It's a pair of maps.
like a graph. No, that's the trip actually that Prince Madoc did take and went into up and through Alabama. But it should be a picture. I'm not sure how it would be listed. I might have it as Devil's Backbone, or it may just say Louisville, Indiana.
Yeah, it's actually at Charlestown, Indiana. It's directly across from Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, I
And
might have it say Louisville, and then
the image on the right is a sketch that was done by Edward T. Cox, and he was the Indiana State archaeologist in 1869 when they visited. That image is
all
done
of these
by,
images I'll load in the comments below too that Rick gives us for you guys to reference later.
yeah, the image that's on the screen right now is actually by Richard Thornton, a gentleman who worked on the site, and he did this image, a recreation of what he thought was there. And it's probably fairly accurate. Number of habitations on the wall itself, on top of the wall, the defensive wall, and several on top, as well as some mounds. There are other features that Richard did not illustrate effectively. And I'm not saying he didn't do it right. I'm saying he just didn't do it. But there are pits that were dug into the top of the bluff, presumably to store something. And I found it to be interesting for the placement because it's 210 feet above the surface of the river, and it is an ideal place for a Roman ballista to throw balls all the way across that river. When you're going to say, why am I bringing up Roman ballista? Because there were several of those still in Britain in Arthur's day.
Yes,
So,
okay.
So
that does make sense.
The image there, what you can't really tell from Richard's image or from any of them, is that defensive wall was about 12 feet tall, 17 to 20 feet thick, and 560 feet long. And it was
wow.
It was not at ground level. It was already up the hill.
So it's already sitting up in a higher terrain.
Correct. And my book, I talk a lot about the Romans and their influence not only on Britain, but also on what I believe to have been an influence over the Ohio River and many of its tributaries, because somehow they got here and wanted to trade. The Romans did, or raid, take your pick. They left the Ninth Legion left Britain, or left history in 117 AD. And none of them ever showed up again until 142 AD. And only one officer, a minor officer in 117, turned out to be the governor of Arabia Petraeus.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. His name was Aemilius. Augustus Emilius Carus. That was his full name, and he ended up being appointed as the governor of Arabia Petraea and was there several years. And when the Templars captured Petra, the theory is, and there's no real proof of this, but a lot of oral tradition, as you were mentioning earlier, says that the Templars found treasure at Petra. And I don't think they meant gold or silver or any valuable materials other than knowledge. And that knowledge was of North America. My
Oh,
position.
wow. I could see that.
Yeah. So in the interim there, between the Romans and the Templars, was Prince Madoc and Arthur II. And Prince Madoc, of course, was blown off course by an extraterrestrial impact in about 562 AD. And
now, is this the comet that is said to hit like the I guess the English area that created the quote unquote dark ages? Is that what
correct.
you're referring to?
It is that event. And whether it was a comet or an asteroid, whether it was a dirty snowball or a snowy dirt ball is kind of immaterial.
Yeah.
Because it ruined pretty much everything around the British Isles and even onto the continent a little bit. And up until the 9th century, it was still dark. You can get that from the letters, first of all, that King Olaf or Saint Olaf sent back from Rome, where he could see the stars. It was amazing. Couldn't do that at
Oh,
home.
yeah.
And so Madoc, being blown off course, spent almost 10 years getting back to Wales. And when he did, he found that, there was no food, there was famine, there was disease, there was incursions by foreigners trying to take over what was easy pickings at that time, and talked Arthur and the Round Table, as we call it, the council, into a migration. And they migrated a whole bunch of ships. There are at least two different versions of how many ships, but it was a lot of people. Probably
yeah, I know
more
I've heard
than
anywhere from 120 to greater numbers. It depends. You are right, the number
yeah,
does fluctuate. And it says that
and
there's two waves of them.
correct. And that's what I concur, that there might be two waves of them. So the story around Louisville and the Falls of the Ohio is that Prince Madoc and his party, this would have been the more permanent party, the second wave party, at one time were holed up on the Devil's Backbone and using it as a defensive port. They were either starved out, locked out, driven out, and rounded up on a place called Corn Island in the middle of the Ohio River and pretty much annihilated. So that's pretty much the story and the reason for concentration on Devil's Backbone. Now, I was there just about a month ago, a little over a month ago, and they used to have signage that talked about Prince Madoc and the whole legend. They had both dates, 1170 and 670, and now there's no signage at all. There's nothing that mentions the whole legend of Prince Madoc.
Yeah, I seen that was removed. Actually, I'm going to try to find out about that too, because I know it was the Daughters of the American Revolution, and of all, believe it or not, I've got like 5 ancestors
Well,
that
that
were
was a
in the
different sign. That was
Revolution.
the one.
Oh, so that's
That
a
was the one
different
at
sign than the
Mobile.
one you're mentioning?
Yes, that was the one at Mobile Bay.
Okay, that one is the one in Mobile Bay.
Yes. So the
So
one I'm
you're
talking
referring
about
to
right
a
now.
sign in Louisville?
Yeah, at Charlestown State Park.
Oh, Charlestown and the Indiana one. Okay.
Right.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the state of Indiana at one time at least acknowledged that there was a legend to this effect, and now they don't even do that. So I'm disappointed in my own home state. How,
You're like, I'm disappointed in my own home state.
well, in that regard, I am, because the guy who built the museum at Clarksville, and it's called the Falls of the Ohio Museum, and it is mostly a geological site where you can walk down to the riverbed and observe 300 million year old fossils. But it also had the only material evidence of the whole Matic legend around Louisville. And that was in the form of some Roman coins that had been discovered, and they had a display of mannequins dressed up as Matic might have been. And they told the story of what they thought they knew. And then after the state of Indiana took over the museum, they slowly but surely did away with all that evidence.
I know a friend of mine on Facebook, I've kind of talked to him a little bit back and forth, and then I recently, by a happenstance, I mean, I've seen it before, but I didn't put 1+1 together. I had been watching Britain's Hidden History with Ross Broadstock. I'd been watching it for years, and I had seen this episode, and for some reason it didn't click with my brain. I guess the first time I watch it, sometimes I got to have, see something, and then something taps me on the shoulder. It's like, oh, there's the light bulb. But Lee was talking about how the Roman coins were found all across the, from east of the Rocky Mountains and different areas, and within a certain time period. And these are like 2,000-year-old Roman coins. And I guess the official narrative, or what they want us to believe, is that people were walking around dropping them out of their pockets or something.
All the
Is that what I
fishermen are losing
understand?
their lucky coins. Yeah. That is
the fishermen. Yeah, right.
Well, almost all of them have been found along waterways.
Don't give my dad any ideas. He's going to expect me to find him a 2,000-year-old Roman coin.
Most of them have been 2nd and 3rd century Roman coins, and you can tell by the picture of whatever emperor is on the front. But there was a package, a cache of 52 such coins found during a bridge construction project between Indiana and Kentucky, not very far from Louisville.
And that's a large number.
Well, yeah, they weren't gold, they weren't silver, they were bronze, but they're still historical value. And you can buy them on the line any day for cheap, actually. But he had he had given 2 of them to another engineer on the project, and then the engineer who found them all moved on to the next project. The engineer with the 2 Roman coins died, and his widow donated them to that museum when Troy McCormick ran the museum. Troy made replicas of those 2 to simulate the 52 in the cache, and simulated a deteriorated leather bag to go with them. So when Troy had the museum, he was doing as best he could to portray the legend, not necessarily that it's fact, but he was honoring the legend because it's a big, important, long-standing story around the Falls of the Ohio. Mm-hmm. When the first white men got there in the 1760s, that fort was there, and it was big.
It was
and
already
it was
there.
Yes, and it had been there for a very long time. And there was an ancient quarry at the top of the bluff that coincided with its usage, we presume, and the stone that made up the walls did not come from that quarry. We don't know what happened to the stone from that quarry. We do know what happened to all the stone after 1869, however. It was cut, milled, destroyed, broken, and removed, presumably to hide whatever it portrayed. Whatever it meant,
okay.
It scared the powers that be. And in this case, the powers that be were Major John Wesley Powell and the Big Four Rail Company. And Major John Wesley Powell was the 2nd director of the United States Geological Survey, and he was the founder and director of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology.
Oh, so, there goes that S name again.
Yeah, and he did both those jobs concurrently. So he had the position where he could direct the railways where to put their rail bed and what to tear up to do so. And that's what happened at Devil's Backbone.
So he had them place it right there through that archaeological area?
No, what he did was he said, I want you to build your railroad right where you want it, across the Ohio, big bridge, and I want you to get all the stone to make your cofferdam to build the pillars from this site. It's 14 miles away.
Wow.
And the Big Four Railroad had tracks right into Bedford, Indiana, which is still limestone central, limestone capital of the world. They bill themselves that way.
Yeah, yeah. I
So there
have a
was no need for them to use the stone from Devil's Backbone. They were directed to do so.
wow. What have you had any I don't know, have you ever had any thoughts of to what you think is this agenda for trying to cover up this narrative?
Yes, I do.
I know I've had a few different ones, but I don't know like
When you trace it all back, it has everything to do with a papal bull called Terra Nullius. And
okay.
what that means is a direct translation. And yes, I studied Latin to write my book. Terra Nullius means empty lands. And the insinuation was empty of Christians. If it's empty of Christians, you can claim it.
Yeah.
The people who are there who are not Christians are yours to do with as you wish. We would prefer that you convert them, but if they won't convert, do whatever you want.
It's
So
kind of
that's
like what
what
they did
happened.
to Ireland.
Everybody. However, that papal bull was dated in 1452. So the Spanish, Portuguese, everybody who accumulated lands as a result of that encouragement from the Pope did so, presuming that there had never been any Christians in North America. But wait, there were a whole bunch of them, in fact. And it would impact all the way back. It would impact the what would the right word be? The sovereignty of the United States, the sovereignty of Canada, the sovereignty of the lands that came from the Spanish and Portuguese discoveries.
All the way down the line. Yeah.
All the way down the line, right. So if there were ever a Christian colony in here, then the Spanish and Portuguese claims were invalid.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
I didn't come up with this in a vacuum either. There were a couple of guys wrote a book about it. A guy by the name of Robert Miller, and he's Dr. Juris of Lewis and Clark University in Oregon. And he wrote a book to that effect, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I get see, and I had always thought that. I mean, I thought it was as far as to cover up the narrative of the English claim to the colonies. I mean, I really, because when I go back, I have ancestors that came in. Oh my gosh! I mean, we're looking back in like 1600s and stuff like. I mean, they were immediately coming up through North Carolina and West Virginia, very very early ages, and they were. And when you look at it and you read some of these paperwork and stuff, and you read some of the wills, I can't help but to think it sounded to me like this was a much more I don't know what you call it, an established society than what they were giving it credit for pardon?
And a cosmopolitan society.
Exactly. I thought that too. And when I read it or read a lot of these different wills, I'm thinking, okay, how is this only just, a short period of time within this span that things have changed this much? And I thought there's just no way. It doesn't make any sense. And then at one point, I even thought it could be the banking system because so much money was borrowed to finance, the war. I thought maybe the Rothschilds, this whole banking system doesn't want the truth, to be told, and they want it to all be England and, these rebellious Americans over here and totally wipe out Wales or anybody else that might have had a claim to the situation.
Well, yeah, and you hit on something pretty important there because in 1803, when we bought the Louisiana Purchase from France, it was in the control of the Spanish. We didn't have the money to pay for it, so we borrowed the money from the Bank of England to give to Napoleon Bonaparte in exchange for not the land, the exclusive right to trade with the people who lived on the land. That's what we actually bought. But we bought it with money that the Bank of England provided for us to pay to their arch enemy, Napoleon Bonaparte. in
Hmm.
1803. So they were
Wow.
perpetuating the war on purpose with our help, and it's, some things never change.
Well, Napoleon had his hands on everything.
And so did the Bank of England. But yeah,
You know what is you got that right too.
and they still
Yeah,
do.
they really did. They still do. I was gonna we both said that they still do. Yes, they do. Um Now when you have been able to like go back and to look in some of the stuff, I know oh gosh, I'm trying to think, I know it was like in the Sevierville area. It was Severe. I'm
John
trying to think of
Sevier.
his names. John Sevier. He says for state he was grabby
He
with
was,
his hands. Yeah.
well, yeah, he
talking
was the
talking
governor
about
of
the
Tennessee.
Rothschilds. Yes, they were. Now,
Yeah.
Sevierville, didn't they discover also Welsh and connected with Prince Madoc up through that area in Tennessee?
Well, they have, yes, several people have made that claim, and they've written about it, and I can't deny that the connections seem pretty strong. But with let's assume that they did come ashore at Mobile Bay or near Mobile Bay,
Hmm.
and then they struck out north for whatever reason. They could not handle the locals there or whatever. They
Hmm.
came north, and they would have come up the Tennessee Valley, which the mouth of the Tennessee River is in the Ohio River at Paducah, basically at Paducah, Kentucky.
Yeah, it is.
So going upriver from there, it's about 100 miles upriver to get to Charlestown. But it's on the other side of the falls. So they would have had to have gotten off the river and portage around that falls to get to 14 Mile Creek.
To get up to 14 Mile. Huh. Yeah, because I was trying to figure out that travel route, how that really would have went. Um, and I always just, I mean, as far as the Madoc, I'm kind of surprised that the Madoc would have came in Alabama versus say porting in wherever, anywhere along the east coast of the United States, that they would come up. Because I mean, I scuba dive, and that's a pretty treacherous area in there for large ships. Or actually, the ships weren't as big as what I always thought when I finally seen one. Because I collect those little wooden boats and stuff, schooners. But when I end up seeing like in real life, I thought actually that's not really all that big. I thought they were huge. But now, if they came up through that land, I mean, that area, there's really a lot of and there's a lot. I mean, you see the islands, but what's not seen, is pretty immense. And the water levels were lower then than what they are now, supposedly. And
I
and of
disagree,
course,
but
over time things change. But now, I think when I read some of the different charts with the tides and stuff, I don't know. It seems to me like maybe we might have even had more waters there that came up further up into the Florida areas and stuff than, what is listed on the, documentations or whatever you want to call it. It looks to me like it might be the opposite of what they're saying.
it
So it
is
would
the
have been
opposite of
easier
what
for
they're
them to
saying.
navigate it. You think it's the opposite too?
Yes, I can show you pretty strong evidence that most of the rivers of the east of the Rockies in North America, not just in the United States, were about 11 feet higher pool depth than they are now.
See, that makes much more sense to me too.
What has really caused the bigger difference is not global warming or any of that stuff. It's clearing all of the detritus matter out of the river so that they flow faster.
Huh. Yeah, that
And,
makes
and,
sense.
and you can go back through all the hydrology reports going back 200 plus years, and you can just see it. As soon as they started clearing all the snags out of the rivers for the steamboats, the water level started going down.
Yeah, that does make perfect sense. And of course, with you being in Louisville and the area I'm at, of course, we're familiar. Many people might not be, but like in Cincinnati, we have like the big steamboat events each year and stuff. So I'm familiar, and we're familiar with the steamboats. A lot of people might not be. And I'm sure those of you in New Zealand, I know like Bonzam, she's in New Zealand. You probably do know. I'm not trying to say that you don't know, but if anybody's listening and doesn't know what a steamboat is, they were I mean, to me, it was like back in then, it was like the cruise ships of their day, but they kind of like went up and down the rivers, and they were multi-stacked, almost like a big cruise ship, but not, their wooden variation of it, and had great big massive paddle boats on the back. And the engines, as you know, by the sound of it, it was a steamboat, and they were ran by steam, and they were used to transport large portions of people up and down the rivers, and of course the Mississippi and
And
stuff. But
good.
the Ohio River is huge, and so
Yeah.
they did it there. Now, if I understand correctly, hi Carmel. If I do understand correctly, don't or wasn't there also um, I don't know if it wouldn't have been mummies. I mean, I guess it would have been the bodies or something, or maybe even just the armor of Welsh that was found there in the Ohio Falls area somewhere.
It there was armor found, and I believe there were two different batches. Apparently, one of them was in 1836, and supposedly there were six bodies with armor that had the mermaid, if you will, sigla of the Welsh.
Oh,
The photograph that was published in the newspaper, Louisville Courier Times, I think it was, Courier at that time. It was actually Turkish armor from about the 11th century, maybe 13th century, but it had absolutely nothing to do with the Welsh. It was a stock photo that somebody threw in there.
mm. Now when
But
was
of
this
course, that
article?
was 1936, and
Nineteen 36.
it completely screwed up serious investigation because he used a stock photo instead of actually something of the armor itself. There was
Anything to throw
another
in a little bit of question marks and
correct, and there was
confusion.
another set going back about 130 years earlier, around 1800, and there was a trail for one of the breastplates as it left Louisville, went through actually Cincinnati, then into someplace in Virginia. And I don't have all that stuff in front of me, but it left a trail that is now untraceable. So,
Imagine that.
yep. The other thing going on that particular line of evidence, the
Hmm.
what they call a stone box grave in the United States, or yeah, all in the United States.
Like a
Um,
sarcophagus or something different.
it is something different, but it's along the same line. And what they did is they took limestone slabs, six limestone slabs, made a six-sided box. It's
Back
a
here.
stone box grave, and they're common in the Ohio Valley area, all the way out into Missouri, barely into Missouri near the conjunction, and they're common in Wales. These two funerary methods
Hmm.
are common to both areas. Also, incidentally, up until around the 8th
Hey,
century,
Evelyn.
the use of these graves included zero artifacts. There was nothing in it but bodies, not even clothes. It was bodies. Then, starting
Wow.
in about the 8th century, they started putting bowls, and uh, most of the bowls were punctured just like the Maya did, except it wasn't in a cenote, it was in a grave. I don't know. I don't have
Wow.
an answer for that one.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Well, I mean, but the Welsh were up and through those areas too. So, I mean, let's say this person's, whatever, say this person's aunt and uncle has migrated further west and they've wanted to come back and see, their brothers and sisters, and then they stay. And then the next thing you know, these families have more families, but they've brought that Western tradition, Maya, so to speak, but they've brought the Western cultures and traditions back east with them again, when they came back to be with their families. I think that would make perfect sense.
It makes a
I
lot
mean,
of sense to me.
yeah, I could see that happening easily. I know, like, just like the etymology of words, it's very easy to use, like, any type of, like, what you're explaining. That's smart that you did mention that. Like worship procedures, especially when it comes to how we dress or take care of the dead or how people think of the dead. That's an easy migration, or much. It's a solid. I shouldn't say easy. Sometimes it's hard, but it is usually easier though. But that's usually a solid migration pattern to follow. How people do. Um, I don't know how you say it, what the relationship is with their dead.
There's funerary practices, but and you can use those practices going all the way back to Neanderthal, for that matter, because
Yeah, that is true.
Neanderthals had their own funerary practices. Um, but on that
The
topic,
Skydor
now
said
we
the
get into
earliest record of the Ohio River depth was 35 feet in the channel in 1532.
yeah, that sounds
Huh.
about right. That would have been
Yeah, that's
during a
pretty
flood,
high.
though. Of course, it was
Bonzam
always
said
flooding.
that it's interesting that they have Celtic stones that's been found in New Zealand, but it's being kept hush hush right now. She's like, you see nothing, hear nothing. They're not mentioning it.
Right. Well, and you have in North America, it's not just the Welsh or the Romans or even the Irish or the Vikings. It's all those people. But
I
on the
think so.
funerary practices, um, some of the most interesting funerary practices that apply to this particular show is Arthur's burials, which is what gave me the title to the book, The Graves, plural, of the Golden Bear.
And
And
explain to me who the Golden Bear is. I know, but explain who the Golden Bear is,
the
please.
Golden Bear is one of the nicknames, if you will, legendary names of Arthur, King Arthur. And when I say King Arthur, it's actually both of them, almost certainly Arthur the First and Arthur the Second, because their two lives spanned around 200 years between Arthur the First's birth and Arthur the Second's death. And in the write-up, you said Arthur the Second was Arthur the First's son. He was actually his great grandson.
Great
So,
grandson. That's right.
yeah. So the span of Arthur's life, if you want to look at it that way, is almost 2 centuries, which is a lot of a problem for the more traditional historians and archaeologists. But Arthur the Second died in North America, and go ask Alan Wilson how he arrived at that. I'm going to take his word for it. Not only because I think he's right, but because I've been to one of the burial sites. I'm absolutely sure of this, by the way. Lee Pennington was on my show back in the day when I had the Oopa Loopa Cafe running 13 years ago.
Oh, I
And
didn't even know that.
and he mentioned a place called the Welsh Caves, and it's in northeast Alabama. And he said, and he had recently undergone heart surgery, and people had told him he couldn't possibly get in there. And I said, Lee, if we have to rig a bosun's chair and lower you over the cliff to get into that cave, we will make that happen. Well, we did not have to use a bosun's chair, but we did get him into the cave. And the cover of my book has a photograph that is the sigla over the entrance to that cave. And
I was wondering.
and it's the same sigla that's on the Arcturus Rex slate from Tintagel. So I'm pretty sure that there's a relationship there.
And is that ancient? Is that Cymru?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I don't know what you would call the sigla, because it's probably a combination of Cymru and Latin, because they were doing all these languages all at once.
And for those that the language of Cymru, that is the language of the Welsh, of Wales, and it's considered to be the history of that is considered kind of like to be possibly a migration in language, so to speak, of the Egyptian and of the Jewish Hebraic,
Pre-Hebraic,
pre-Hebraic written languages.
Yeah.
Yep,
you are. Maybe a little Phoenician thrown in there too.
You know what? I thought I was getting ready to ask you that. Do you think that there was? So yeah, so I do. I agree with that too. I do think there might be some Phoenician where it's been mixed with that. I really do think that. And I also think when they had their, before they started from the old world, when they started making their migrations this way, I think they came with them too. I think they all migrated further and further west together.
Yes, and nobody would talk to the Romans about it. But so Arthur, my opinion, my studied opinion, if I can say it that way, is that
Yeah.
that little cave outside of Mentone, Alabama, is the first place where they took the body. In Allen's translations from the ancient Qumri, it says that they sewed that he was killed during uh, a confrontation with the natives, and that they sewed his body into 2 deer skins and put it somewhere to let it desiccate, and it was there for 2 years.
Like mummify?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
they. It doesn't say that they did the full Egyptian mummification of removing all of the organs or whatnot, only that it dried. In the Welsh caves at Mentone, Alabama, is a burial cyst that is perfect for that task. Um,
Hmm.
and he would not have been a particularly large man, but he could have been very easily 5.5 feet tall in this burial cyst.
Wow.
Then
Art.
after about 2 years in there, they made the decision to take the body back to Wales, where they found that the regent in charge, while Arthur II's son was not yet of age, was no one to be trusted, so they did not tell him that Arthur was dead. After the son came of age, 2 years later, they disclosed that Arthur was already back in Wales. He just couldn't talk to him right now.
Oh, okay, because they couldn't discuss the coronation. Like he just can't make
Right.
it to the coronation right now. He's just not up to it.
Right. And then
Now, the
after that,
producer asked, where are the burials located approximately?
okay, the first one is that it's about 3 miles outside Mentone, Alabama, inside what they call DeSoto Falls State Park.
Oh, that's interesting. It seems to me like they always somehow turn all of these particular sites into state parks, don't they?
Or power plants or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the second one, second cave, Lee talks about. I couldn't give you a good position, location. Can't give you Latin long on that one. But it also has a burial cyst in it. Then the third location, according to at least the previous stuff that Alan Wilson had put out, was at St. Peter's Church, and it's pretty convincing to me.
Okay. Now the St. Peter's in Wales.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now I wonder what is he saying is his and so the actual remains of Arthur eventually were brought out and then they were interned in St. Petersburg.
St. Peter's Church,
Oh,
according to Alan.
that's what I
But
meant, St. Peter's.
yeah, there's also a large burial mound nearby. Um, and the Chronicles of Kings in Wales talks about it. So I'll defer to Alan and Barham for those details, but
Yeah, because
the
they did
graves.
immense studies.
Oh yeah, they should. You are the master of understatement.
I know. And I've watched it over and over and over again. Some of his lectures and stuff that he had in Kentucky. And it's too
Yeah,
funny
Jim
too, because
Michael.
sometimes yeah, exactly, with Michaels. And sometimes it just seems like he's just like, you can see that he's done it so much. There's different times that you can see Alan say, I'm trying to think of how the wording that he even used, but when he was like doing the slides, and he's like, well, let's just get on with it so they can catch on to what we're trying to say here. You could tell he was
Yeah,
just kind of like, I've been saying this forever. Would somebody just catch on to what I'm trying to tell you?
yeah, and nobody at that time, no one in Great Britain had really given him any thought. Um, since then, things have changed a little bit. Somebody gave him enough thought that Baron Blackett's car was blown up.
You know what is about that? And and I can't help but I've got a huge question mark about Ross Broadstock. I really, he was in great shape and great health, and I don't know. That's just curious to me. I won't say anything this ways or that ways, but I just that's awful coincidental. And I know he was threatened. He had said on his podcast also.
Yeah, the speculation runs rampant, but it seems to be a lot to speculate about.
Yeah,
I
I
know that.
know. It really does. And I'll tell you what, the one show that I watched, it even, and it was just like anytime, I mean, just, oh my gosh, him having those kids, because I play violin, and him having those kids get in there and playing violin and everything that they do. And he was just, anytime you watch him, he's just living his life. When I watch it, I'm like, this is just some guy. This is his passion. And he is just so real out there living his life that all of us are getting it. You know, he was easy for us to understand, easy to get. And if he didn't understand something, he had no problem to say, oh, hey, explain that to me. You know, he didn't like feel like he was being made dumb or anything. It like, hey, explain it to me. And then that helped the rest of us that didn't fully understand because we couldn't ask. It was just like, hey, awesome. He just asked that. And when I seen him really getting out there and taking it to foot and taking the podcast out and walking the lands and stuff like that, it started making more and more sense. And then when he started arguing, put some history books back into, you know, the Wales history books back into the Wales school system. That seems to be about when they started really giving him a hard time because they seen people were really paying attention to him and they knew he was right.
Well, it matters. If you're not right, they don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, right. Yeah, actually, that's common sense. I didn't think about that. Yeah, they like you to
Yeah.
throw a lot more mud out there.
Well, and there are a number of cases on which we could speculate where healthy individuals ended up non-healthy and dead after just a little bit of time following key discoveries.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if that's you talk about a book there. That book, there'd be volumes. That would be like, yeah, that would be an encyclopedia full.
it would,
Um,
and that goes back to my whole thing about John Wesley Powell, but and maybe three-letter agencies of the government, plural.
yeah, plural. That is true. I think there might be a lot of that going on right now over there in the monarchy. A lot of, you know, hiding things under the shells over there right now too. It seems like. Now, when you mentioned these cuirasses or whatever it was that was found, the armor, the Welsh armor that was found, and you said it went up through Cincinnati and stuff like that. Um, what documentation or how does anybody know where those were found and where they went to? Even though the story itself's pretty much, you know, gone.
Right.
Is there any way to somewhat follow that trail?
It dies in Ohio, to be honest. Um, what is what was the first capital of the Ohio Territory? Help me out here.
Oh gosh, I should even know that because
Marietta.
my family was the St. Clair family.
Right, Marietta.
Marietta,
And
Ohio, sure was.
it was traced that far, and then the trail died. But it went from there into Virginia, supposedly. And Ronald
Oh,
Ness talked about it. A couple other authors talked about that early 1800 or so outing.
our
So,
producer said,
and
talk about hush hush. I cannot find a definite answer nor a hinting towards a burial issue and credence. Wow. So they don't even mention anything about the burials or anything there in that state park.
oh no, they don't. You mean in Charlestown? No, they don't.
Now, where did you say the one burial was at? Did you say it was in DeSoto or?
Yes, it's in DeSoto Falls, and
Yeah,
the name
DeSoto
of the
Falls.
place is called Welsh Caves. And
Oh, they even call it Welsh Caves.
yes, and there are 5
Oh,
caves there. And the one that you enter, the one that has the sigil over it, you go in there and you crawl. You have to crawl about 70 feet, and I'm talking like 13 inches high, to get to the next cave, unless you want to crawl on the outside of the cliff, which is 150 feet above the bottom.
no.
I chose to crawl, and And that means that that burial cyst, which is very real, and that's exactly what it is, and it is man-made. They had to drag the body through there to get into that cyst. If we assume that he did not have any armor, did not have any heavy clothing, but he was sewn into two deer skins, 150, 200 pounds to be dragged through this tiny little space. And it's a rocky bottom. It is not a comfortable trek.
So you've went up through that. And so
Yeah.
I would assume it, I mean, and of course that's been a labor of love
Yeah.
and honor, I would think. I mean, they wanted to keep his body protected, period.
Correct.
They had to, huh? Wow. Now, um, I know I've like read it like a lot of the different, I guess, cultural impacts that it seems like they've been able to, um, state that this is a parallel. Oh, he's pulled up something here. What is this?
I'm not sure what that one is. It's not Welsh Cave.
Oh, it says Majestic Caverns. Yeah, that's something different.
Yeah.
Now I've noticed there's like a lot of some of the cultural parallels. I can't talk now. Parallels between different cultures and stuff that you can find. And I know as I keep delving into this, it seems to me like in Newark, Ohio, or in like you said, Marietta, and all these different areas. I mean, is it just me, or I mean, I'm sure all these. I'm new to this, so I really don't know the names of all the researchers and stuff and all of their materials yet myself. But it seems to me like these same items keep popping up all across the United States of America, and these different hieroglyphs and different things keep popping up that seem to be Welsh.
Well, yeah, and Irish. There's both. There's Ogham writing that pops up, and we'll use Arthur the First right now. There were signs at Tintagel of what might have been Irish or Celtic Ogham. I don't consider any Celtic language to be valid. They had different languages. Celtic was a people, not a language.
Yeah, exactly. There was multiple languages and dialects and
Right. So when you say Celtic Ogham, you're actually probably talking about Irish, although you could be talking Iberian. You could, because Ogham was fairly common, treat Ogham especially. And it was a different way of writing that could portray Latin, it could portray Kumri, it could portray just about any language. It's just a writing method. However, that writing method has been found and identified by Irish Ogham experts in Dakota or Wyoming County, West Virginia.
hmm.
And it was discovered by an archaeologist. His name was Robert Pyle. He pretty much never worked much after that.
That grant money seems to dry up just as much as the archaeology, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And uh, and that panel, just about 100 yards from that particular Ogham panel, he discovered a skull, which he managed to get C14 testing and DNA testing on this skull. It dated from roughly 700 AD, very close to Arthur II's incursion. And it was Irish. So maybe it was St. Brendan. I don't know. But
Oh, that's going back into another one of my ancestors. See, this is what's strange. Every time I look into this, they're always another ancestor too, and it's like they just keep linking it. Like John D. He's on my mother's side as an ancestor, and I'm like the other ones are on my dad's side, and it's just. I swear to goodness, it's like the universe or God or something just keeps pushing me more into learning and learning more about this.
yeah, I don't know how much time we have left in this, but since you brought up John D. John D was in possession, and it is still on display at the Tower of London, I believe. It is what they called a scrying mirror, and this one was in the possession and used by Montezuma, supposedly. Now, how an Englishman ended up with a prize pried from dead hands by the Spanish, I don't know.
I wondered about that.
But it
How could he
happened.
have gotten that? And he happened to be Welsh,
Yes.
and it
I don't
happened to have,
happened a lot with him.
yeah.
The intrigues are amazing with that man.
Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, my grandmother was, well, great grandmother on that side, she was D's, but it was D before they made it D's, just like our Walters was Walter before it. Everybody add S's, or like Robertsons become Robinsons and all this different
Yes.
stuff when they uh, came over here and stuff. Wow, I didn't even know that about him. I might look into that a little bit further too.
Well, I
It's like
looked
so many.
into it for the line of sight communication stuff because that's what I think that they were doing. The Olmecs, the Mayas, the Aztecs, all of them were using line of sight communication, and up into our region too. There were at least 63 different relay stations along the Ohio River to relay line of sight messages.
I believe that actually the just was it last week? No, it's been a couple of weeks back because I had Marcia K. Moore on my show, and she was doing her like doing discussing the Paracas skulls and stuff
Yes.
that she has done. And that week I had went to the Miamisburg Mound, which is north of me, and my uncle basically lives across the quote unquote river and gully area. Actually, his property sits on the third highest area in his property sits on Warren, Butler, and Montgomery County, and I mean it sits really high. And as I was up there on top of that mound there in Miamisburg, and you can see out. And I know if I had binoculars, I could probably, as far away as he is, I know for sure I could end up seeing him. And I sat there and I thought, they've used all of this, and it's right there by the river too. The Great Miami
Yeah.
is right there.
Well, since you brought that up, Miami Fort and Shawnee Lookout, just east of you, just at Hamilton, basically.
Yeah, I was in
Um,
Hamilton yesterday.
okay. So right across the Ohio and the Kentucky side is a place called Petersburg.
Mhm.
And there was a wooden palisaded fort at Petersburg. And it was within sight of everything on the Ohio side for the Great Miami, for the Little Miami, and of course for the Ohio. But when you get to the Indiana line, State Line Cafe is right there, by the way.
Oh,
Um, there is a bluff in Dearborn County, Indiana, that has 5 mounds on it. It had fortifications around parts of it, and if you could follow it, and if there were not so much light pollution in the area today, you would be able to see all the way across from uh, what would be Lawrenceburg, Indiana, to Hamilton, or certainly to Miami Fort with no problem at all.
wow.
And from either one of those, you could see to Petersburg, Kentucky. And from any of those, you could see to Aurora, Indiana, because there was a 30-foot tower on top of the bluff at Aurora. I talked to the man whose father knocked it down in 1936 for pay, of course. Now there's a big water tower there. You can see that light
Wow.
forever.
Wow. There's so much that's been taken down.
On
We
purpose.
have, yeah, it really is. It really is. And we have, I mean, of course, in my area, I mean, my daughter, I mean, she went to Lakota schools, Lakota Indians. My other daughter and stepson, they went to Madison Mohawks. So we had those. And actually, the land and everything right there where my uncle and them are, and back in behind them, that's the Carlisle Indians. And I mean, Ohio, we've had thousands and thousands of mounds. It's just
15,000 recorded, probably a lot more that never were.
unbelievable. And pyramids.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and pyramids everywhere too, which is just illogical to me. And I mean, I do believe, of course, without question, I do believe that, there have been Native American mounds. And I do believe that there are Native American mounds. I would never state that they didn't have them or that it didn't occur. But I do have friends, and actually one of my friends, his father has been a long-term long, long term in their family. I think they're into the fifth generation of the Indian chiefs and shamans of the Chickahominy tribe and stuff. But all like a lot of these Native American lore, they say we had other people that came to our lands that wasn't us, or they showed us how to do this and they showed us how to do that. And
Right.
even names, certain words and stuff that's came out. Maybe even I think it's Ojibwa might have has some Welsh words or something in it, and it's like
Mandan
maybe
too.
these. Oh yeah, and the Mandan actually that's a subject we'll get into. I just can't help but to wonder maybe they learned these mounds from someone else. It might be their mounds, but
Or maybe
maybe they learned
someone
it
else
from
learned them
someone
from
so
them.
much earlier. Yeah, oh yeah, or that too. Yeah, maybe when the Welsh went back, they learned it from them. But I just feel like it's like you said. I think there's a lot of shared culture going on other than just this one. This square goes over here with this square, and this
Right.
circle's over here with this circle. Keep them all. So you got to keep them separated, like the song says.
There are
Our
so
producer
many
said,
holes in what we think we know. And when I say we, I'm talking about everybody, not just the diffusionist folks in our little community. There are so many holes in what we think we know that we may never be able to fill all the holes. However, I've been doing this stuff for 45 years or so, and I'm starting to gloss over some of the holes and figure out which
"Yeah,
ones have already been handpicked. When you get into the antiquarian stuff, as an example, there is an outfit called the American Antiquarian Society. Have
I
you ever
agree
heard of
too,
it?
Bonzam." Bonzam over in New Zealand, she said, "You're 100%."
Yeah, the American Antiquarian Society at one time collected all of these out of place artifacts, and they didn't try to interpret or anything. They just tried to preserve what they had found, and they were doing business, doing uh, communications with correspondence with people out in the far west for them because it was based in Boston. And in, say, 1810s, 1820s, Ohio and Indiana were the wild, wild west. Well, they still were in the
Yeah,
1860s too, but that's a whole different story. In 1818, there was a guy in Ohio, for the most part, who recorded all kinds of strange things. Marietta, Ohio being one of the most strange. They dug into one of the mounds there that is now Mound Graveyard, I think. I don't know the exact Mound Cemetery, I think is the name of it.
Mount. Yeah.
And they found a burial, and the person in it was about 7 feet tall. The armor,
Mm.
and yes, he was wearing armor, and he was armed with a sword, and the sword, the actual the sheath for the sword was a silver plated copper, and they figured Caleb Atwater was the guy's name, and he did a bunch of testing. He did absolute or a specific gravity test on the metal to know what he found. He uh, the buckles on the belt that went with the scabbard were also silver plated copper, and
Hmm.
uh,
That takes a lot of skill from
it,
back then to do that.
you'd think, yeah. And the blade of the sword had rusted away, so it was almost certainly steel, because even iron would have held up better than that. But nobody knows who these people were or why they had these medals. He sent the
Wow.
information into Boston, and everybody wondered, but nobody ever tried to find out.
And I don't even, I don't even want to say it, but I'm going to. Was his body taken to the basement of the Smithsonian, or where's he at?
Probably,
Does any? Yeah,
yeah.
probably. Oh,
7 footers don't last long around here.
no, they don't. They do not at all. I know. When I was doing my the clan genealogy and stuff of Clan Robertson in Scotland, and of course that one it goes back to even the Robert the Bruce and some of them. I did not know how huge he was. And they started saying like the length of his sword, and I thought, well, heck, the length of his sword's almost as long as I am tall. I'm only like a little over 5'1", so I thought, wow, that's and a lot of these individuals that seem to have came over. I mean, we always keep thinking like how difficult it was to do this, and it took this many people, and how far something is. Really, I mean, yeah, the Atlantic is far. I'm not minimizing the size of the Atlantic Ocean. It's massive. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't, but in the scope of things and their abilities and everything else, I don't understand why to me, it's more illogical and it's more unfeasible and statistically a lower number
Impossible.
for them to have came up. Yeah, I find it impossible that they did not cross the ocean, other than just the little Viking settlement, up north. I just don't see it as being feasible that they did not at some point multiple times cross the ocean. I think there was a constant flow for the most part.
Well, the biggest problem there is we're absolutely certain that they traded. There would have been pretty much no reason to come here or go there, as the case may be, without trade. So the challenge then becomes to figure out what they were trading, how they were doing it, and why can't we find the tracks? Well, if you go to Upper Michigan and out to in the middle of Lake Superior at a place called Isle Royal, you will find that they had thousands of what they call open pit copper mines on Isle Royal. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
going back to 7,000 BC, when the
It is
whole
really
copper,
old.
yeah, when the whole copper age started in Europe, they were mining copper in Isle Royal.
Oh, how coincidental.
Yeah. And interestingly, going back to the whole Caleb Atwater thing, a lot of the what they call um, placer or float copper in Michigan, not so much on Isle Royal, but on the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan, it it only has one primary um, inclusion, one thing that is not pure copper in it, and that is silver. So it could be that Caleb Atwater's buckles were made of this float copper that already had the silver in it.
Huh.
It would still weigh the same for the specific gravity test, and you can find it. I've seen dozens, hundreds of examples of this. They call them half breeds,
Wow.
half silver, half copper. And when
Oh
you
yeah, I
go
need
to,
anybody that wants to win a copy. We'll end up buying a Senate TV. Anybody that wants to win a copy of Rick Osmond's book, um, I have my cell phone snaps right there. Put hashtag Golden Bear in lowercase letters in the comment section below, please. I forgot to say that. As a matter of fact, while we're speaking about that, where can people find your book, and how can they reach out to you to? Because this is kind of interesting. I looked for your book the other day it was 2 days ago. So I don't know is it even possible to get your book now to think about it? Because I forgot. I was sitting here with my daughter and I said, I have to order his book. I said, I want to know what he is saying here. So this is fascinating. Then I said, wait a minute. Why is his book $249 on eBay? And then I seen another one. I said, hold on. Why is his book $176 on eBay? And then I started looking, and it was like across the board like that. And I thought, hold on. So is your book sold out possibly, and people
it,
are vying to get their
it,
hands on
it
it?
is currently out of print. So anything that you find is a used copy. However, today, I earlier today, I pretty much solidified a deal to take it back into print. It'll be months before that happens, but
I
um,
knew that's what it was. I told my daughter, I said, it's got to be the people like me that started putting this together. And you're a veteran in the field. I mean, you've vetted this out. You've been a pioneer in the field, and all of us are looking out to learn this information. And when I started looking over some of your stuff, I said, he knows his stuff. I have to get this book so that I know these answers. And then I went ahead and I Googled it, and I was like looking at it, and I thought, what? And I put down my piece. I told my daughter, I said, am I misunderstanding this because she's the Amazon shopper of the bunch, and I do not. I've never bought anything. Believe it or not, I have not bought one thing on Amazon Prime yet. My family just is like they're going to disown me.
Well,
But I showed it
I
to her, and
can't
she
say
said,
that because I
"No,
bought a copy
actually,
of my
they
own
are."
book. Yeah. No, I have two copies of there are actually two editions. The first edition is the one that has Arthur Sigel on the cover. The second edition has a Roman soldier on the cover, and they're slightly
Okay.
different in content. Um, they are out there. They're not cheap.
No, they're not, folks.
I wish, I wish there had
Everybody
been a
put
couple
together
thousand
their
more.
money and just have him make another edition.
Well, it's coming. Before it was also available as a Kindle or whatever. It was on a half a dozen different electronic platforms, and
Oh, I
I'm
didn't
not
see
going that
one.
way. Yeah, it's not available anymore because
Oh, okay, that's why I didn't see it.
yeah. Um, for those who downloaded it as a Kindle, they can still have it, but others cannot purchase it at this point. I'm
That
sorry to
really
say.
says a lot about the research and the time that you've taken to do your research, and that shows how much people respect your research and I guess value your knowledge and agree with you, or people wouldn't be willing to pay $250 for a used book to get their hands on your books. The cheapest I saw was $176, but it's like I do understand why people are doing it because we want to know what's the truth, of America. We're especially in this day and age. I mean, there's so much false narrative, and we've been lied to so much.
Yep, it's true. And
Ironically, I have an original first pressing, one of the very few that came out that is in the bookshelf. That is the one I am talking about.
thank you.
Hey, you can't give that away. Hold on a minute. Let me wheel and deal with you first. I got a Papillon to trade you. No, I'm joking. I love my dog. I'm not going to give you my dog for a book. I'll give you
Well,
the
I
neighbor's
do
dog.
love that. I had the most expensive I've seen it listed. I don't know that it actually sold for that. It was $847 on Australia and Amazon used book, whatever. And of course,
Wow. Did you ever expect that when you made that book?
no, not even. I mean, it had a cover price of $18.95, and that was, I
Wow.
was signing and whatever. But
You probably look back and go, what in the world's going on? But that
Honestly,
shows that you're
that's
on the right trail.
nothing. That's nothing. Probably about 6-7 years ago, the copy that I have, I was talking to a guy, and he is a huge King Arthur fan and a theologian on Camelot. And he said he purchased your book for $1,600 from a private source.
Now, listen,
well,
you're supposed to be telling them that you need a percentage of this.
I'm happy that people are making money on my book.
You're like, what's the irony? See, I write, and you know what? I have not made. When you do it, usually you do. It costs you money to write the books.
Well, it certainly cost me a lot of time. And when I say it took me 10 months to write the book, it took me 40 years to actually know everything that I put into the book.
To digest and comprehend what it is that you have in there.
Yeah. And to tell the story in the long form, I have to start when I was 14 years old. And a couple of old geezers who lived in the town where I grew up were both self-described and self-studied historians. And they talked about these ancient fortresses, a line of ancient fortresses that stretched all the way across southern Indiana. And Devil's Backbone was one anchor, and the other anchor was on the Wabash River at Miram, Indiana. I visited that one recently too. And it took me till now to realize that they not only were they not lying, they were underestimating the importance of these places. And I wrote an article about the Falls of the Ohio and the Miram stuff, and I said, if there was a line of fortresses, they would be about this far apart. They would be on waterways. It would have these militarily important features. And a guy wrote in to the magazine, Ancient American Magazine, to say, I have a place you need to see. So I went to see his place.
You guys get your hashtags in really quick for the drawing.
And I later I put a ruler across a map of Indiana from Miram to Devil's Backbone. And the place that the guy had written me about was on the line, perfectly in the middle. So I have now extended it from 2 out to about 6, maybe 7 different fortresses that were in this line these old men told me about.
Wow. Wow. And they've, however long they've probably lived there. I mean, most people move in and generational, they live on these properties. So this person learned from their grandfather or uncle or whatever, or grandma, and they've probably known these tales for years or
Yes, they
generations, I
did.
guess just say.
Yeah, several generations. But one of the old men had actually he had been an employee of the United States Geological Survey at one time. And
Oh,
he was the guy who planted the flag on top of Pikes Peak to do the surveying of its elevation and actual placement.
oh,
So he was on the inside of some of that crap, and he knew a little bit about the Big Four Railroad incursion at Devil's Backbone, but he didn't know enough to tell me everything. He just knew there was something wrong there. And
wow.
he had actually
Now,
been alive in 1904 when the archaeologist folks went there and said there was never anything here. This is all modern man-made crap.
wow. Now, see, I was wondering, even when I looked at the reconstructions that he did of the Devil's Backbone area, to me that even looks like some of the housing structures that you see when you look at that back at the Welsh and stuff back then. I mean, it even seems to look like, the round, somewhat thatched, I guess, is that what you call that technique?
Yeah,
Roofs
thatch
and
roof stuff.
everything.
Yeah.
So is
Yeah.
that correct that is it does look like it?
Well,
Is that what
there
those
are
were?
some very distinct similarities, yes, and not just in the structures. Their boats were the Mandam boats were exactly the same as the Welsh boats, coracles they called. The dress, according to most historians, the dress that the Mandans used was more traditional Welsh than any of the other native tribes. When Lewis and Clark went there, and they actually wintered over in the main Mandan village before they continued west. Fair-haired, red or blonde hair, blue or green eyes. The women looked real good to them. Of course, these 30-odd men had been on the road for a year and a half. And there were other things, songs that they when this is where it gets really interesting. When Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis west, he gave him specific instructions, and you can read the letter yourself, to look for Welsh-speaking Indians, to look for anything that would endanger the sovereignty of the United States, and how to send that information back in a coded form that only Jefferson could read. We don't know exactly what the key to their cipher was, but we know they used a cipher.
Wow. And we know, and wasn't Jefferson the one that also agreed? I'm trying to think of which president it was. Didn't one of the presidents agree with Prince Madoc had been here?
Yes, it was Jefferson. Well, he agreed that there were enough stories that bear notice.
Okay, I thought it was President Jefferson that thought that there was some credence to that. You guys make sure that you do get hashtag Golden Bear in for a chance to win a copy of the book. So I was thinking about that they did have that. I mean, there's just so much. There's too many people that are even credible people that for, this to be just a quote unquote completely fictionalized, created, made up figment of somebody's or some culture's, imagination or oral lore, so to speak. There's just too much archaeology. There's too much out there. And also too many people in powerful places that
Have
genuinely,
hidden
yeah,
things,
that they've,
destroyed things, obfuscated information that they could not destroy or hide. Um, they do their best to vilify people who actually have evidence. Um, um,
and
so
to
I'm going.
me, if they got rid of as much as they did and there's still this much evidence, can you imagine how much evidence there was to begin
Correct.
with? I mean, if they've got rid of this much evidence, it's absolutely amazing. What'd she
Well,
say?
yeah,
Oh,
I don't know. I'm not. I can't see the messages on my phone, but
I can't see me. The mine's not refreshing for some reason.
yeah, there's a lot of evidence still out there, and some of it is just. It's not hard to understand. It's just hard to find.
Just got an happenstance. Sometimes happen to come across something that they happen to have let slip past their fingers.
Right. So I've been looking for that kind of thing for the last 15 years, and I've found way too much of it. Now, going
Yeah.
back to one other thing that we talked about earlier, and that is the Roman coins being found east of the Rocky Mountains. I know of
Mhm.
one cache of 376, I think it was, found in Utah, so west of the Rockies.
Wow. And that was in
And
Utah. And
nearly
I
as
wonder
many
if
as
that
had
was
ever
a
been
Latter-day
found.
Saint situation.
Yes, and those are the people who brought it to my attention.
Ah, okay. Because they've done immense genealogies and studies. I mean, they have. I'm kind of upset. I just now read that Blackstone, I forget how many billions of dollars, but they just spent like billions of dollars to take over Ancestry.com. And I mean, supposedly it's so that they can look and see like what our genealogy is. And it's supposed to be a pharma, um, I don't know how you'd even say it. Just anyway, something that they can use as a tool, supposedly, to help prevent and all this is and that's and various situations. But I can't help but to worry and be concerned, like those like me. I mean, I can live. There's very few people that can document their genealogy. I mean, without question, I can document several lines. And there's very few people that can do that these days. They keep everybody moved all over and stuff. And fortunately, those cemeteries down in Kentucky happen to, the families have all kept care of them, like the Box Cemetery and stuff. And then just happens to be who the people are. But
Yeah.
I can't help but to worry and be concerned. Are they going to try to do something with that genealogy? Just like I said, that one grave, that was before you had moved on. The one grave that kind of piqued my interest and diverted me this way. Somebody came into Noctur Cemetery and removed these original headstones. Through, my cousin Wayne has this documented. He's got prior pictures too. Threw them over the hill where they're still at and replaced it with a 1960s headstone. And it doesn't make a sense why they did it. And her name's Robertson, and you see a lot of those changes being done. And I can't help, and there's only one sarcophagus there now instead of two. Supposedly one's buried on top of the other one, but that makes no sense because where that's at, Noctur, Kentucky, you have to pull off to this little area, and then there's a creek, and you would have to get a crane to carry a sarcophagus, or even if it was just a headstone, you would have to get a crane or something because it's a swinging bridge where you walk back and forth. So you're not carrying a heavy headstone. Even if you got one fella here and one fella there, it's not going to support you and two guys in a headstone across the swinging bridge. So they've had to use a crane to put it over there. And I can't help but to use common sense and go, someone spent a lot of money to replace these headstones that weren't faulty to begin with. And I just started following it out. And it kind of really bothers me that if they get a hold of this, and Blackstone was with, Black Rock, or actually Black Rock was under Blackstone, are they going to start trying to wipe out or at least alter the genealogy of people? It's concerning. I don't know. Our producer said, I have documentation of my ancestors getting a battlefield award with paperwork containing George Washington's signature on it. Wow, that's very cool. You're right. He says, know where you came from. That is true. And I
Well,
think that's why they've, like Wales, of all countries, do you think? And I think maybe that's why they've worked so hard at getting them to forget their history so that they don't have this
yeah.
claim on the United States of America, like you've mentioned.
Well, no, actually, the Queen of England at that time, Elizabeth I,
Hmm.
wanted to use John Dee's brain to claim North America through Prince Madoc,
Oh, okay.
and couldn't get the papal see to actually agree or that it had it. So what they did was the discovery and colonization thing was the the second choice. If they could have claimed it,
Oh,
if they could have claimed it through Madoc, then they would have. But as it was, they had to earn it. Um,
so this is a
now,
Vatican hangup.
yes,
Oh,
but it also would have been a hang up for the the Spanish, Portuguese, and French colonies because it was already Christianized.
yeah. My family, that, and it says it right there in their records that they were Christian when they came here.
Yeah, mine too. I go back to England in 1520 with my surname, but before that, I'm pretty sure it was Scandinavian and it comes from Osmunder. But I can't
Huh.
prove it. It's informed speculation at this point. But I have not done a DNA search yet.
And those can go both ways. I know with the DNA, it's interesting. Actually, our Bach line, it goes all the way to the Black Sea. It's like Nubia, like northeast of Egypt. And you can follow that trail all along and where it calls all the way out through Germany and some of them through like the Welsh areas and stuff. But that's a different line. But that's really interesting there. Now, I hope, and after I get a chance to get your book, I would and read a little bit more and stuff on this. I would love to have you back on again to discuss some of this, especially when I can even talk to you in a level of knowing at least a little bit more than of what you know.
Well, I'll send you a PDF until you can get a print version.
Oh, cool beans! I'll be. My daughter will be like, she never leaves the computer. She gives me like I get on something and I have to binge learn it so that my brain can remember it. Hey, I would love that because it's hard to find any information on this.
It is, and I in my book I've done my best to document my sources, and I'll also do my best everywhere to say this is my speculation versus this is exactly what I found. So it's I do interpretation just like archaeologists, real degreed archaeologists do, but I am strictly avocational, so I don't
And
carry
you're
as much
not
weight.
being tainted by grant money.
Correct. Not restrained in that fashion.
Yeah, not restrained. Bonzam said this. She said this was very interesting and thank you. She's in New Zealand. She and I talk a lot about this whole global change of narratives.
Well, they have their own, but mostly about Maori versus other cultures. But
Oh, I know. That's very interesting, isn't it?
yes, it is.
It sure does. They've got a whole, yeah, they've got that whole situation there, and with a different group. You're right. They sure do.
Yep. When I come back,
Well,
we'll talk about who walked where 65,000 years ago. They didn't walk; they sailed.
you know what? I agree to that too. I absolutely agree to that.
Yeah.
You have a blessed day, and I will see you. I've got my Dr. Pepper and my hibiscus tea here.
Well, we'll
I want
bring
to let you
Pepper in
guys
next
know,
time.
and I'm going to let you guys know in advance. Next week, it's kind of an interesting and a different turn that we're going to take. I actually have a guy, and he is a voodoo priest that will be on next week, and it's not something that usually. It's going to be a little bit different, and we're going to talk about some of the historicals down in that area and stuff because there's just so much that's been changed, and that's taking us into the whole French area and the French quarters and all of those areas. That's had a lot of changes too, but a lot of them try to hold on to their narratives. But yeah, I'm pretty serious about searching and researching this entire the King Arthur thing, to the point that I told my sister, I even told her, I said, I'm selling my BMW and getting a Prius so I can afford the gas to start driving around and checking these sites out better.
Yeah, my travel budget has been restricted lately, but it'll come back.
Yeah, you're right.
Hey,
Well,
Deana, don't forget True Crime and Mystery. What's tomorrow?
oh yeah, actually they have a show on tomorrow. It's True Crimes and Mystery, and it's the grandson of H.H.
Great,
Holmes.
great grandson.
Oh, yeah, great grandson. See, with me doing genealogy, you would think I would know all these greats and greats, which I do, but when I write it out, I just do it in the number and just go with it, because if I said so many, but I am kind of blessed. I mean, I was raised up with my greats and got to know them, and a lot of people don't do that, and I think that's helped, and it's also fueled my interest in wanting to search this, to learn more about this entire Prince Madoc situation.
Do you want to go ahead and do the drawing now before Rick signs off so he knows who won?
However you want to do it. Yeah.
All right, let's run.
Carmel's like, I won again.
Yeah, Carmel won again. Go ahead, Carmel, and message us at Skydor Entertainment on Facebook. Send us a message under contact us at the new website, skydorentertainment.org, and I will make sure you get the book.
I'm going to encourage all of you guys in the meantime, and I want to have Rick back on again after I get a chance to read this and study a lot of the different variations of this, because this is something that personally has affected me in life, and it's something that I actually I asked somebody to do a prayer for me recently about a direction turn, and I've really been thinking about maybe taking a direction to only focus on the studies of King Arthur and Prince Madoc in some of these areas. So I don't know, you're like 45 years of that, so I don't know, that's a lot. There's a lot to learn. But I really do feel that compelled, because every time I turn around, as a matter of fact, I was watching Shaman Sundays the other day, and it was one thing after another that started coming up about genealogy. And then I watched another show, and this came, and every time I turn around, I keep getting the shoulder like, hey, get back on your path and start, following this trail out with Madoc and stuff. I think it's a tale that people's waiting to hear finally.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, and the book just kind of glosses over a lot of the areas, but I simply ran out of time and space.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah. I can understand that one. There's a lot of material, and that says a lot.
Yeah, the study is coming to its maturity, and I hope a lot of people get interested. So
I hope so too. Yeah, I hope so too. Well, I want you to have a very blessed evening. And I thank you, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. And we do have, she said, did you say, okay, I thought she was asking us a question here. And I will put some of these photos and images down in the comments below because this is a recorded podcast, and anybody that wants to go back and they want to cross-reference some of the things that Rick has taught us with images, and you can kind of, if you can find it, you can get out there and try to do your own research and find out about this. I think the more of us that at least can get out there and start finding it and documenting it, the more difficult it makes for them to hide this narrative and the truth. I mean, it's just the harder we make it on them, and that is true. And now I have a couple new rabbit holes too. Actually, the 7-foot fella in Marietta, I have to go find in the DeSoto Caves. I've got like a couple.
Yeah. If you have any questions, Dean, please feel free to message me, and I'll try to steer you in the right direction.
I sure will. And I want all of you guys to have a fantastic evening and have a blessed week. And I will see you guys again next Thursday. Can't see my thing.
All righty. Good night, y'all.
Hey, you have a blessed night, Rick.